The red and blue lights flashed in my rearview mirror, and I knew this wasn't about my driving. I had been going exactly the speed limit, my hands at 10 and 2, my registration current, my inspection sticker fresh. But none of that mattered when you're a black woman in a nice car in the wrong neighborhood, apparently. Which country are you listening from? Tell us in the comments below. My name is Monica Williams, and I've spent 42 years learning how to navigate this world as a black woman in America. I'm a pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, a mother of 3, and until that humid Tuesday evening in July, I thought I had figured out how to move through life without attracting the wrong kind of attention. I had worked the evening shift that day, staying late to comfort a 7-year-old boy named Marcus who was scared about his surgery the next morning. His mother couldn't stay overnight due to work obligations, so I held his hand until he fell asleep, humming the same lullaby I used to sing to my own children. Amazing Grace always seemed to calm the little ones. It was nearly 10:30 when I finally gathered my things and headed to my car in the hospital's parking garage. The hospital sits in North Philadelphia, a part of the city that's seen better days but where hope still lives in the dedicated staff who show up every day to heal children. I've worked there for 8 years now, ever since I completed my nursing degree at Temple University. It was a long journey to get there. I had my first child, Keisha, when I was just 19, which meant putting my education on hold while I worked multiple jobs to support us. I drive a 2019 Honda Accord, nothing flashy, nothing that should draw attention. I bought it used from a dealership in the suburbs, saved up for 18 months to put down a decent down payment. The salesman, a middle-aged white man with a practiced smile, seemed surprised when I walked in wearing my scrubs and asked to test drive it. He kept steering me toward older models with higher mileage until I showed him my pre-approval letter from the credit union. The car is reliable, safe, and gets good gas mileage. Perfect for a single mother who works long hours and needs to shuttle 3 kids to school, practice, and everywhere else they need to be. The car represents more than transportation to me. It represents progress, stability, the American dream that I've been chasing since I was a teenager with a baby and no clear path forward. Every payment I make is a statement that I belong, that I deserve nice things, that my children deserve better than what I had growing up. The hospital is in North Philadelphia, and I live in Mount Airy, a 20-minute drive on a good day, longer when traffic is heavy or when construction clogs the usual routes. I've made this trip hundreds of times, usually listening to gospel music on WDS or catching up on missed calls from my kids. Sometimes I listen to audiobooks, usually self-help or nursing journals, anything that helps me grow professionally or personally. That night, I was thinking about my youngest, Terrence, who was starting his senior year of high school in just 3 weeks. He'd been accepted to Howard University on a partial academic scholarship, and I was so proud I could barely contain it. The acceptance letter was still pinned to our refrigerator, next to his honor roll certificates and a photo of him receiving an award for community service. Howard had been his dream school since middle school, when his history teacher told him about the university's legacy of producing black leaders and intellectuals. Terrence was everything I had hoped for in a son and more than I had dared to dream possible when I was struggling as a young single mother. At 17 he was already 6'2" with his father's broad shoulders and my stubborn streak. He played varsity basketball, not because he was the most talented player on the team, but because he worked harder than anyone else. His coach, Mr. Thompson, often said that Terrence was the heart of the team, the one who lifted everyone else up when they were down. Academically, Terrence maintained a 3.8 GPA while taking AP courses in biology, chemistry, and calculus. He'd never given me a moment's trouble, no detentions, no suspensions, no calls from the principal's office. He was president of the student council, a position he'd won by organizing a school-wide fundraiser for the local food bank that raised over $3,000. He volunteered at that same food bank every Saturday morning, had been doing so since he was 14. His plans were clear and ambitious. Pre-med at Howard, then medical school, then a residency in pediatrics. He wanted to come back to Philadelphia and work at Children's Hospital, maybe even work alongside me someday. "Imagine that, Mom," he'd say with that brilliant smile of his, Dr. Williams and Nurse Williams saving kids together. The thought always made my heart swell with pride and hope. My oldest, Keisha, was already in her 3rd year at Temple University, studying elementary education with a minor in African American Studies. She wanted to teach 2nd or 3rd grade, inspired by her own 2nd grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson, who had seen something special in her when others had written her off as just another kid from a broken home. Mrs. Patterson had recommended Keisha for the gifted program, had stayed after school to help her with reading, had even bought her books to take home when she learned we couldn't afford many. Keisha worked part-time at a tutoring center near campus, helping younger children with their homework and test preparation. She had a natural gift for connecting with kids who were struggling, probably because she remembered what it felt like to be behind, to feel like school was something that happened to other people's children. She was passionate about educational equity, always talking about the achievement gap and how good teachers could make all the difference in a child's life. My middle child, Marcus, was 15 and obsessed with computers and technology. He could fix anything electronic: phones, tablets, gaming systems, even my ancient laptop that I'd bought used for nursing school. He had dreams of working for Google or Apple someday, or maybe starting his own tech company. His room was filled with computer parts he'd bought at garage sales and electronic stores, piecing together systems that worked better than anything you could buy in stores. Marcus was quieter than his siblings, more introspective, but no less brilliant. His teacher said he had an intuitive understanding of mathematics and science that was remarkable for his age. He was already taking college-level computer science courses online, earning certifications that would help him get into good engineering programs. He talked about using technology to solve social problems, to create apps and programs that could help people like us, working families who needed better access to information, resources, and opportunities. We lived in a small 3-bedroom house that I'd bought 5 years earlier after finally saving enough for a down payment. It had taken me 3 years to save the $15,000 I needed, working double shifts whenever possible, selling my old car and taking the bus for 6 months, skipping meals more often than I care to admit. The house wasn't much, needed new windows, a roof repair, and the kitchen was older than I was, but it was ours. The mortgage payment was steep at $1,400 a month, not including taxes and insurance, but I worked extra shifts whenever I could and we made it work. I picked up weekend shifts, holiday shifts, overtime whenever it was available. Sometimes I worked 60 hours a week, coming home exhausted but knowing that every extra dollar went towards securing our future. The kids all had their own rooms for the first time in their lives, which felt like a luxury after years of cramped apartments where we'd shared bedrooms and sometimes even beds. Keisha had decorated her room with photos of historical black women she admired: Maya Angelou, Rosa Parks, Shirley Chisholm. Terrence's room was a shrine to basketball and academic achievement, with trophies and certificates covering every available surface. Marcus had turned his room into a miniature electronics lab, with computer screens and gadgets everywhere. The neighborhood was mixed: working-class families, young professionals, retirees who'd lived there for decades. It wasn't the fanciest area, but it was safe, stable, and had good schools. The houses were well maintained, the streets were clean, and neighbors looked out for each other. Mrs. Johnson next door always accepted packages for me when I was at work. Mr. Rodriguez across the street had helped me install a new front door when mine started sticking. It felt like a real community, the kind of place where children could grow up feeling secure and supported. Life wasn't easy, but it was good. I had a job I loved, where I felt like I was making a real difference in the world every day. There's something profound about caring for sick children, about being the steady presence that families need during their worst moments. I'd held crying mothers, celebrated with families when their children recovered, and mourned with them when we couldn't save their babies. It was emotionally demanding work, but it gave my life meaning and purpose. I had children who made me proud every single day, who were growing into remarkable young adults despite all the obstacles they'd faced. We'd weathered divorce, financial struggles, my own battles with depression after their father left, and the everyday challenges of being a black family in America. But we'd not just survived, we'd thrived. I believed in the American dream, even when it felt like the dream didn't always believe in me. I'd seen evidence of it in my own life: the ability to work hard, get an education, buy a home, raise children who would have opportunities one never had. Yes, there were obstacles, barriers that my white colleagues didn't face, but I'd found ways around them or through them. I voted in every election, local and national. I volunteered at the kids' schools when I could. I donated to charity when I had extra money, which wasn't often, but I tried to give back when possible. I paid my taxes, followed the rules, tried to be the kind of citizen and neighbor that made communities stronger. My faith was important to me, though I didn't make it to church as often as I would have liked due to my work schedule. But I prayed every night, thanking God for my blessings and asking for strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. I taught my children to be grateful for what they had while working toward what they wanted. That night, as I drove home from the hospital, I was thinking about all of this: my blessings, my children's futures, the plans we were making for Terrence's college send-off. I was mentally planning his going-away party, thinking about which relatives to invite, what food to serve, how to make it special without spending money we didn't have. I was also thinking about work. We'd been short-staffed all week, and I'd volunteered to pick up an extra shift on Saturday. The overtime pay would help with Terrence's college expenses. Even with his scholarship, there were still fees, books, room and board costs that weren't covered. I'd already started working extra hours to build up savings for his freshman year expenses. The radio was playing quietly, a gospel station that featured both traditional hymns and contemporary Christian music. Kirk Franklin was singing about faith and perseverance, themes that resonated deeply with my life experience. I hummed along as I drove, feeling peaceful and content despite my fatigue. I was 5 minutes from home, driving through a quiet residential neighborhood when I saw the lights. My heart sank immediately, that familiar feeling of dread settling in my stomach like a stone. I knew this feeling well. Every black person in America knows this feeling. It's the instant recognition that your evening has just taken a potentially dangerous turn, that you're about to be judged not as an individual but as a representative of your entire race. I pulled over carefully, putting on my hazard lights and rolling down all 4 windows as I'd been taught by my father years ago. Make yourself visible, he'd said. Keep your hands where they can see them. Don't give them any excuse. I placed my hands on the steering wheel where they could be clearly seen and waited, my heart pounding but my breathing steady. The officer took his time getting out of his patrol car. Through my mirrors, I could see him running my plates, talking into his radio, taking notes on a clipboard. The wait felt eternal, each second stretching into minutes. I used the time to mentally review everything I'd done while driving. Had I rolled through a stop sign? Exceeded the speed limit even briefly? Failed to signal? I couldn't think of anything, but doubt began to creep in. Finally, he approached my window, flashlight in hand, even though the streetlights provided plenty of illumination. It was a power move, I realized. The bright light in my face was meant to disorient and intimidate. I squinted but kept my hands visible and my voice ready. License and registration, he said without preamble. No explanation of why he'd stopped me, no greeting, no acknowledgement of my humanity. Just a demand, delivered in a tone that suggested I was already guilty of something. Of course, officer, I replied, keeping my voice steady and respectful. I'd practiced this conversation in my head countless times, like every black parent does. I'm going to reach into my purse for my license, and then into my glove compartment for my registration. I'm moving slowly so you can see what I'm doing. He grunted in response, shining his flashlight into my car, sweeping it across the seats as if he expected to find something incriminating. The light lingered on my work bag, my purse, the coffee cup in my console. He was conducting a visual search, looking for any excuse to escalate the situation. I handed him my documents with steady hands, though my heart was racing. Years of dealing with difficult patients and their families had taught me to remain calm under pressure, and I drew on that training now. Officer Bradley, according to his name tag, was a white man in his early 40s with a thick neck, cold blue eyes, and the kind of mustache that suggested he took himself very seriously. He studied my license with more attention than necessary, holding it up to compare my face to the photo, as if I might be using someone else's identification. Monica Williams, he said slowly, pronouncing each syllable as if tasting my name. What are you doing in this neighborhood? The question hit me like a slap. This was my neighborhood. I'd been driving through it to get home for 5 years. But I kept my voice level and polite. I'm driving home from work, officer. I'm a nurse at Children's Hospital. Aha. His tone suggested he didn't believe me. And where exactly is home? I gave him my address, watching his expression grow more skeptical with each word. Mount Airy was a mixed neighborhood, but it was definitely more upscale than where we were currently standing. I could see him processing this information, trying to figure out how someone who looked like me could afford to live where I said I lived. You live in Mount Airy? He asked, his tone implying I was lying. Yes, sir. For 5 years now. And you can afford that on a nurse's salary? The question was loaded with implications, each one more insulting than the last. He was suggesting that either I was lying about my job, engaging in some illegal activity to afford my home, or that someone was supporting me, the welfare queen stereotype that follows black women everywhere. I felt my face grow hot with anger, but I kept my voice level. I work very hard, officer. I often work double shifts and I've been a nurse for 15 years. I also worked multiple jobs while putting myself through nursing school. This was true. Before becoming a nurse, I'd worked as a home health aide, a restaurant server, a retail clerk, a house cleaner, whatever it took to support my family and pay for school. I'd attended classes during the day and worked nights and weekends, studying between patients and during breaks. It had taken me 6 years to complete a 4-year degree, but I'd done it without taking on crushing debt. Officer Bradley walked around my car slowly, shining his flashlight through the windows, peering into the back seat and checking the trunk area from outside. I sat perfectly still, hands still on the steering wheel, trying to project calm even as my mind raced. What was he looking for? What did he think he would find? "Step out of the vehicle," he said when he returned to my window. "May I ask why, officer?" "Step out of the vehicle," he repeated, his hand moving toward his weapon. The gesture was unmistakable, a threat, a reminder of who held the power in this interaction. I complied immediately, my movements slow and deliberate. I stood beside my car, hands visible, while he conducted what he called a safety search of my vehicle. He went through everything. My purse, dumping out the contents onto my hood, wallet, keys, lip balm, pens, receipts, a small package of tissues, my work badge, a photo of my children. My work bag, examining each item, stethoscope, small medical reference books, granola bars, more pens, a change of clothes for emergencies. He even searched the small emergency kit I kept in my trunk, going through the jumper cables, first aid supplies, and bottles of water. Each item he touched felt like a violation. These were my personal belongings, the everyday items that make up a life, and he was handling them as if they were evidence of some crime. He found nothing because there was nothing to find, just the detritus of a working mother's life. A few loose crayons from when my kids were younger, a spare pair of comfortable shoes, some protein bars, a car charger, a small umbrella. "You seem nervous," he observed, watching me carefully as he rifled through my belongings. "I'm not nervous, officer. I'm confused. I still don't understand why you stopped me." This was partially true. I wasn't nervous in the way he meant. I wasn't guilty of anything, wasn't hiding anything. But I was afraid, the kind of deep, bone-level fear that comes from knowing you're powerless in a situation that could escalate beyond your control. "Your driving was erratic. You were speeding." I knew this was a lie. I had been going exactly 35 miles per hour in a 35 zone, using my cruise control as I always did. I had been careful as I always was, especially when driving alone at night in my work scrubs. I was driving the speed limit, officer. I had my cruise control set. "Are you calling me a liar?" The question was a trap and I knew it. If I said yes, he could escalate the situation, claim I was being hostile or uncooperative. If I said no, I was admitting to something I didn't do. Either way I lost. "No, sir. I'm just confused about the discrepancy." By now, a small crowd had gathered. A few people had come out of their homes to watch, drawn by the flashing lights and the unusual sight of a traffic stop that had gone on for more than a few minutes. I could feel their eyes on me and I wondered what they were thinking. Did they see a criminal being rightfully stopped, or did they see what I saw, a hard-working woman being humiliated for no reason? Mrs. Patterson, an elderly white woman who lived on the corner, stood on her porch in her robe and slippers, arms crossed. Mr. Thompson, a black man in his 50s who worked for the city, had stepped out of his house and was watching with obvious concern. A young couple I didn't recognize stood in their doorway, whispering to each other. Officer Bradley seemed to enjoy the attention. He made a show of examining my registration again, calling in my information a second time even though he'd already done so. He asked me to recite my address again, my social security number, my children's names and ages. Each question felt like another small violation, another attempt to make me feel small and powerless. "Where are your children tonight?" he asked. "At home." "Alone?" "My oldest is 17. He's babysitting the younger ones." 17. He raised an eyebrow as if this was somehow suspicious. "That's awfully young to be left in charge." I felt my temper flare. Terrence was more responsible than many adults I knew. He'd been helping me care for his siblings since he was 12, had never given me reason to doubt his judgment or maturity. He's a very responsible young man. He's been accepted to Howard University on an academic scholarship. "Howard, huh?" The officer's tone was mocking, dismissive. "One of those affirmative action cases, I suppose." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my hands begin to shake, not with fear now, but with rage. This man was attacking not just me, but my son, my brilliant, hard-working son who had earned his place at one of the most prestigious HBCUs in the country through years of dedication and academic excellence. Terrence had a 3.8 GPA. He'd scored 1450 on his SATs. He'd written essays about his plans to become a pediatrician and serve underserved communities. He'd earned his scholarship through merit, through the same hard work and determination that had gotten me through nursing school. "Officer, I don't think that's appropriate." "I'll decide what's appropriate," he snapped. "I'm going to need you to take a sobriety test." "I haven't been drinking." "We'll see about that." The field sobriety test was another humiliation. He made me walk a straight line heel to toe, counting my steps out loud. He had me stand on one foot with my arms at my sides, counting to 30. He made me touch my nose with my index finger while my eyes were closed. He had me recite the alphabet backwards, a test that has nothing to do with sobriety and everything to do with creating opportunities for failure. All while the neighbors watched. All while I burned with shame and anger. All while I maintained my composure because I knew that any sign of emotion would be used against me. Of course, I passed every test because I was stone cold sober. I hadn't had a drink in months, couldn't afford to, both financially and because my job required me to be sharp and reliable at all times. But passing the test didn't seem to matter to Officer Bradley. "Well," he said finally, as if disappointed that he couldn't arrest me, "I suppose you're free to go. But I'm going to be watching this neighborhood. If I see you driving erratically again, it won't go so easy." The threat was clear. He was telling me that I was marked now, that he would be looking for any excuse to stop me again. The message was unmistakable. "You don't belong here and I'll be watching to make sure you remember that." He handed me back my license and registration, his fingers lingering on mine in a way that made my skin crawl. It was a final assertion of power, a reminder that he could touch me, detain me, humiliate me, and there was nothing I could do about it. I got back in my car with as much dignity as I could muster, my hands shaking as I started the engine. I pulled away slowly, carefully, knowing he was watching my every move, hoping I would give him some excuse to pull me over again. I drove the remaining 5 minutes to my house at exactly the speed limit, checking my rearview mirror constantly, my heart still pounding with adrenaline and rage. I made it 2 blocks before I had to pull over again. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't grip the steering wheel properly. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a closed grocery store and cried, deep, angry sobs that came from a place I tried not to visit too often. I had been humiliated. Not just stopped, not just questioned, but deliberately degraded in front of strangers. Officer Bradley had made it clear that he didn't believe I belonged in my own neighborhood, that he thought my success was somehow fraudulent, that my son's achievements were meaningless. He had violated my dignity, my privacy, my basic human rights, and he had enjoyed doing it. The worst part was the helplessness. There had been nothing I could do to stop it, no way to defend myself without risking escalation. I had been completely at his mercy, forced to submit to his authority even when that authority was being abused. The knowledge that this could happen again, anytime, for any reason or no reason at all, was terrifying. When I finally made it home, the house was quiet. Terrence was asleep on the couch, his long legs hanging over the armrest, a calculus textbook open on his chest. He looked so young, so innocent, so vulnerable. I stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching him breathe, feeling the weight of motherhood and fear settling on my shoulders. How could I protect him from a world that would look at him and see a threat instead of the remarkable young man he was? How could I prepare him for encounters like the one I'd just had without destroying his hope and optimism? How could I teach him to be proud of who he was while also teaching him the survival skills he would need as a black man in America? I covered him with a blanket and went to check on my other children. Keisha was at her desk, studying for a summer course she was taking. She looked up when I appeared in her doorway. "How was work, Mom?" "Fine, baby. Don't stay up too late." She nodded and returned to her books. I didn't tell her what had happened. She had enough to worry about without adding my trauma to her load. Marcus was already asleep, his room dimly lit by the glow of a computer screen showing lines of code he'd been working on. He'd fallen asleep at his desk again, something he did when he got absorbed in a programming project. I gently woke him and helped him to his bed. "Sorry, Mom. I was working on an app idea." "It's okay, sweetheart. Tell me about it tomorrow." I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed replaying every moment of the encounter, thinking of all the things I should have said, all the ways I should have stood up for myself. But I knew the truth, there was nothing I could have said that would have changed the outcome. In that moment, I wasn't a nurse, a mother, a homeowner, or a taxpayer. I was just another black woman who had forgotten her place. I found myself researching on my phone, looking up Officer Bradley's name, trying to find out if others had similar experiences. What I found was disturbing but not surprising. There were multiple complaints filed against him over the past several years. Stories similar to mine, traffic stops that seemed racially motivated, searches conducted without probable cause, hostile and degrading treatment of minority citizens. One complaint had been filed by a black family who claimed Officer Bradley had pulled them over while they were driving home from church, demanding to know if the children in the car were really theirs. Another involved a Hispanic man who said the officer had detained him for over an hour, claiming his license looked fake even though it was genuine. Each complaint told a similar story of humiliation and powerlessness. And each complaint had been dismissed or resulted in nothing more than additional training for the officer. The pattern was clear, but apparently, it wasn't enough to matter to anyone in authority. The next few days were difficult. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, checking my rearview mirror obsessively, afraid I would see those flashing lights again. I started taking different routes to work, even though they were longer and more expensive due to tolls. I began leaving for work earlier, driving more slowly, being even more careful than usual. But the worst part was the doubt that crept in. Had I been speeding? Had I done something wrong? I knew I hadn't, but Officer Bradley had been so confident, so certain. For brief moments, I wondered if I was remembering it wrong, if maybe I had been distracted and hadn't realized I was going over the speed limit. This is what gaslighting does. It makes you question your own perception of reality. It makes you doubt yourself even when you know you're right. I caught myself doing it and forced myself to stop. I knew what had happened. I knew I had done nothing wrong. I would not let his lies become my truth. I told my sister Denise about the incident when she called to check on me. She was furious, more angry than I'd heard her in years. "You should file a complaint," she said. "You should call the newspaper. This is exactly the kind of thing that needs to be exposed." But I was afraid. I had 3 children to think about, a mortgage to pay, a job to protect. What if filing a complaint made things worse? What if it affected my work? What if it put my family at risk? What if Officer Bradley decided to retaliate? "Denise, you don't understand. I can't rock the boat. I have too much to lose. Monica, you can't let him get away with this. What about the next person he stops? What about your own kids when they start driving?" She was right, of course. But knowing she was right and having the courage to act on that knowledge were two different things. I promised her I would think about it, but I wasn't sure I was brave enough to follow through. I did some research online and found that Officer Bradley had been involved in several other incidents beyond the complaints I'd already discovered. There was a lawsuit filed by a family claiming he had used excessive force during a traffic stop. Another family had claimed he had entered their home without a warrant, claiming he was in pursuit of a suspect who was never found. The pattern was extensive and troubling. This was not a good officer having a bad day. This was someone who consistently abused his authority, who seemed to target minority citizens for harassment and humiliation. And somehow he was still on the street, still carrying a badge and a gun, still terrorizing people who looked like me. I started having nightmares. In them I was pulled over again, but this time things went worse. Sometimes my children were in the car. Sometimes the stop escalated to violence. Sometimes I didn't make it home. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, and have to check that all 3 of my children were safe in their beds. The fear followed me everywhere. At work I found myself distracted, jumpy. When security guards walked by, I tensed up. When police officers brought in patients, which happened regularly in a children's hospital, I felt my stomach clench. I had always been proud of my professionalism, my ability to stay calm under pressure. Now I felt like I was falling apart. My supervisor, Janet, noticed the change in my demeanor. She was a kind woman in her 50s who had been my mentor since I'd started at the hospital. "Monica, are you okay? You seem on edge lately." I considered telling her what had happened, but I was afraid it would make me seem unprofessional or unreliable. Instead, I made excuses about stress at home, about worry over Terrence's college expenses. "If you need to talk, I'm here," she said. "And if you need some time off, we can work something out." Her kindness almost made me cry. It reminded me that there were good people in the world, people who saw me as a human being worthy of respect and compassion. But it also highlighted how powerless I felt. I shouldn't need time off because a police officer had abused his authority. I shouldn't have to suffer in silence because speaking up might make things worse. 2 weeks after the incident, I was still struggling with anxiety and sleep deprivation when something happened that changed everything. I was working a Saturday shift, trying to catch up on some extra hours to help with Terrence's college expenses, when my phone rang. It was almost 2 p.m., and I was just finishing lunch in the break room when I saw Terrence's name on my screen. He rarely called me at work unless it was an emergency. "Mom, I need you to come get me," he said, and I could hear immediately that he was crying. Terrence never cried. Not when he broke his arm playing basketball in 8th grade. Not when his father missed his high school graduation. Not when he was rejected from his first-choice college before Howard accepted him. "What's wrong? Where are you? Are you hurt?" "I'm at the police station downtown. Mom, they arrested me. They said I stole something, but I didn't. I swear on everything I love, I didn't steal anything." My world stopped. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what he was telling me. My son, my brilliant, responsible, college-bound son, was at a police station under arrest. I'm coming right now. Don't say anything to anyone until I get there. Do you hear me? Nothing. I left work immediately, barely stopping to tell Janet there was a family emergency. My hands were shaking as I drove downtown, my mind racing through all the worst-case scenarios. What if they charged him with a felony? What if his college scholarship was revoked? What if this destroyed his future before it had even begun? The police station was an imposing brick building that I'd driven past hundreds of times but never thought I'd have reason to enter. The desk sergeant was polite but unhelpful, telling me only that my son had been arrested for shoplifting at a local electronics store called TechZone. The amount was over $200, which made it a felony charge. When can I see him? He's being processed now. Should be another hour or so. Another hour. My son was sitting in a cell somewhere in this building, scared and confused, while I was forced to wait in an uncomfortable plastic chair in a lobby that smelled like disinfectant and despair. I called my sister, I called my church, I called a lawyer whose number I found online. The lawyer, a black woman named Patricia Hayes who specialized in criminal defense, agreed to meet me at the station. Don't let them question him without representation, she advised. And don't let them convince you that cooperating will make things easier. In my experience, it rarely does. When I finally saw Terrence 3 hours after his arrest, he was a mess. His eyes were red from crying, his clothes wrinkled from being processed and searched. The confident young man who had hugged me goodbye that morning was gone, replaced by a scared child who threw his arms around me like he was drowning. Mom, I didn't do anything wrong. I swear I didn't do anything wrong. The story came out in pieces, interrupted by tears and anger and confusion. Terrence had gone to TechZone with his friend Devin to look at gaming laptops. They had been saving money from their summer jobs. Terrence worked at a community center, Devin worked at a fast food restaurant, to buy Marcus a computer for his birthday. Marcus had been using my old laptop for his programming projects, but it was slow and outdated, barely capable of running the software he needed. Terrence and Devin had decided to pool their money and surprise him with something better. They had spent over an hour in the store, comparing prices, reading specifications, asking questions of the sales staff. They were serious buyers, not just browsing. Terrence had a notebook where he was writing down model numbers and prices, trying to figure out what they could afford. While they were in the laptop section, store security approached them. 2 guards, both white men in their 20s, who demanded to see inside their backpacks. When Terrence asked why, they said they had reports of suspicious activity. What kind of suspicious activity? Devin had asked. Just empty your bags, one of the guards had replied. They complied because they had nothing to hide. In Devin's backpack there were textbooks, a water bottle, his wallet, and some snacks. In Terrence's backpack, the guards found a small wireless gaming mouse, still in its packaging with the store's security tag attached. I had never seen it before, Terrence told me, his voice breaking. I had no idea how it got there. I told them I didn't put it there, but they didn't believe me. The store manager was called, and he immediately accused both boys of theft. He said he was tired of teenagers coming into his store and stealing merchandise, and he was going to make an example of them. He called the police without reviewing any security footage or conducting any kind of investigation. When the police arrived, they arrested Terrence and Devin without question. They were handcuffed, read their rights, and taken to the station in the back of a patrol car. Devin's parents had already arrived and posted bail. Now it was just my son and me trying to figure out how our lives had been turned upside down in the space of a few hours. The lawyer, Patricia Hayes, arrived shortly after I was allowed to see Terrence. She was a small woman with natural hair and intelligent eyes who radiated competence and authority. She listened to Terrence's story without interruption, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. This sounds like a setup, she said finally. It's not uncommon for actual thieves to plant merchandise on innocent bystanders to avoid getting caught themselves. We need to see that security footage. But getting access to the footage proved more difficult than expected. The store manager claimed it would take several days to review and compile the relevant sections. The police said they couldn't release it until their investigation was complete. Everyone seemed determined to slow down the process, to make it as difficult as possible for us to prove Terrence's innocence. Meanwhile, my son was facing felony charges that could destroy his future. The arrest would show up on background checks, potentially affecting his college admission, his scholarship, his ability to get jobs or professional licenses. Even if the charges were eventually dropped, the damage might already be done. I posted bail using money I had been saving for Terrence's college expenses. $2,500, nearly 2 months of extra shifts and careful budgeting. Watching them process my son's release, seeing him in handcuffs being led through the station like a common criminal, was one of the most painful experiences of my life. On the drive home, Terrence was quiet, staring out the window with a look I'd never seen before. The optimism and confidence that had always defined him were gone, replaced by something darker and more cynical. "Mom, why do they hate us so much?" he asked finally. The question broke my heart because I didn't have a good answer. How do you explain to a 17-year-old that some people will always see him as a threat, no matter how smart he is, how polite he is, or how hard he works? How do you tell your child that the world isn't fair, that justice isn't blind, that the system is designed to work against people who look like us? I don't know, baby. I wish I did. That night, I held my son while he cried. This young man who was supposed to be excited about starting college, who was supposed to be focused on his future. Instead, he was learning harsh lessons about the world that no teenager should have to learn. But as I lay awake that night, listening to the house settle around me, I realized something had changed in me. The fear was still there, but it was being overtaken by something else. Something stronger. Something that had been building since that night I was pulled over, through all the sleepless nights and anxiety attacks. I was angry. But more than that, I was determined. I was tired of being afraid, tired of being victimized, tired of watching my family suffer while those responsible faced no consequences. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I called Patricia Hayes first thing Monday morning and told her I wanted to fight this with everything we had. Not just for Terrence, but for every black child who had been falsely accused, every parent who had been forced to watch their child be criminalized for existing. "Good," she said. "Because I think we have a strong case. I've dealt with this store before, and there's a pattern of racial profiling. But it's going to be expensive and it's going to be public. I don't care about the money, and I'm not afraid of publicity anymore." She filed motions to compel the release of the security footage, citing civil rights violations and discriminatory prosecution. She also filed a civil rights complaint with the federal government, alleging that the store and the police department had engaged in a pattern of racial discrimination. While we waited for legal proceedings to move forward, I made another decision. I drove to the police station and asked to speak with Chief Martinez about my traffic stop 2 weeks earlier. I brought with me a notebook where I had written down every detail of my encounter with Officer Bradley: the time, the location, what was said, what was done, how I was treated. Chief Martinez was a Hispanic man in his 50s who listened to my story with what seemed like genuine concern. He took notes, asked clarifying questions, and assured me that the matter would be investigated thoroughly. "Mrs. Williams," he said finally, "I want you to know that the behavior you've described is not acceptable. If these allegations are substantiated, Officer Bradley will face disciplinary action." "Chief Martinez, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How many complaints have been filed against Officer Bradley?" He hesitated for a moment, then pulled out a thick file. 23 over the past 5 years. "And what disciplinary actions have been taken?" "He's received additional training, counseling, and written reprimands." I felt that familiar anger rising again. 23 complaints and he's still on the street? "Mrs. Williams, I understand your frustration. But we have to follow due process. Officers have rights too, and the union." "What about my rights? What about my son's rights? What about the rights of all the people he's harassed and humiliated?" The chief promised to look into the matter personally, and I left feeling slightly hopeful. But I also knew that hope wasn't enough. I had to do more. I started researching beyond just Officer Bradley. I learned about the local chapter of the NAACP, about civil rights organizations, about lawyers who specialized in police misconduct cases. I found out about body cameras, about citizens' rights during traffic stops, about the statistics on racial profiling in our city. What I discovered was both encouraging and depressing. Encouraging because there were people fighting for change, organizations working to hold police accountable, lawyers willing to take on difficult cases. Depressing because the problem was so much bigger than just one bad officer or one biased store manager. I decided to attend a city council meeting. I had never been to one before, but I put on my best suit and prepared a 5-minute speech about my experience in my son's arrest. When they called for public comment, I stood up and walked to the podium, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "My name is Monica Williams. I'm a pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital, a mother of 3 and a taxpayer in this city. 3 weeks ago, I was pulled over by Officer Bradley for no reason other than driving while black in a nice neighborhood. I told my story calmly and clearly. I talked about the humiliation, the fear, the impact on my family. I talked about my son's arrest and how it could have ruined his future if not for good legal representation and the determination to fight back. I'm not asking for special treatment, I concluded. I'm asking for equal treatment. I'm asking for the same respect and dignity that every citizen deserves. I'm asking for accountability when public servants abuse their authority. The room was silent when I finished. I walked back to my seat, my hands shaking slightly, wondering if I had made a mistake. But then something unexpected happened. One by one, people began to stand up and applaud. Not everyone, but enough to make me feel like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't alone in this fight. After the meeting, several people approached me. Other parents who had similar experiences with Officer Bradley. Community leaders who had been fighting these battles for years. A local reporter who wanted to tell my story. Most importantly, a city councilman who said he had been pushing for police reform but needed more community support. Would you be willing to speak at more meetings? He asked. Would you be willing to share your story with other community groups? I was nervous about becoming a public figure. I didn't want to be seen as anti-police or as someone who was trying to get attention. But I also realized that staying silent hadn't protected me or my family. Maybe it was time to use my voice. The article came out the following week in the city's main newspaper. It was fair and balanced, presenting both my account and the police department's response. The department claimed they took all complaints seriously and that Officer Bradley was under investigation. The article also mentioned similar complaints against the officer and raised questions about accountability and oversight. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My phone rang constantly with calls from other victims of police misconduct, from community organizations wanting me to speak, from reporters wanting follow-up interviews. Some of the calls were supportive, others were hostile, but all of them made it clear that I had touched a nerve. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. 3 days after the article was published, I got a call from David Chin, a law student at the University of Pennsylvania who had been in TechZone the day Terrence was arrested. Mrs. Williams, I've been following your story in the news and I think I can help. I was in that store the day your son was arrested and I saw what really happened. My heart started racing. What did you see? I saw a white guy in his 20s acting suspiciously near the laptop section. He kept looking around nervously and I thought he might be shoplifting. I saw him approach your son and his friend, pretending to ask about one of the computers. While they were talking, he dropped something into the taller boy's backpack. This was exactly what Terrence had suspected but couldn't prove. Did you tell anyone at the time? I tried to, but the security guards weren't interested in what I had to say. They had already decided your son was guilty. I've been feeling terrible about it ever since. I should have spoken up more forcefully. David agreed to testify in Terrence's defense and to provide a written statement detailing what he had witnessed. His testimony, combined with the security footage that Patricia Hayes had finally obtained through legal motions, clearly showed that Terrence had been framed. The case against my son was dropped immediately. The district attorney apologized for the false arrest and expunged the charges from Terrence's record. The real thief, identified through the security footage and David's testimony, was arrested and charged. But I wasn't satisfied with just clearing my son's name. I wanted to make sure this didn't happen to other families. Working with Patricia Hayes and several community organizations, I filed a civil rights lawsuit against TechZone for racial profiling and discrimination. The lawsuit revealed a pattern of targeting Black and Hispanic customers, of subjecting them to additional scrutiny and false accusations. Other families came forward with similar stories. The case eventually settled out of court for an undisclosed amount, but more importantly, TechZone agreed to implement new policies on customer treatment and employee training. Meanwhile, the investigation into Officer Bradley was gaining momentum. The publicity from my case had encouraged other victims to come forward, and the mounting evidence of misconduct became impossible to ignore. The FBI opened a civil rights investigation, and the city announced new policies on police accountability. Officer Bradley was finally fired after an internal investigation substantiated multiple complaints against him. He was also charged with several crimes, including perjury for lying in police reports and civil rights violations for his pattern of targeting minority citizens. The changes didn't happen overnight and they weren't perfect. But they were a start. Body cameras were mandated for all patrol officers. A civilian oversight board was established with real power to investigate complaints and recommend disciplinary action. Officers were required to undergo implicit bias training, and those with multiple complaints were flagged for additional supervision. 6 months after that terrible night when I was pulled over, I was invited to speak at a police community relations event. I stood at the podium in the same community center where I had attended my first city council meeting, looking out at an audience of police officers, city officials, and community members. I didn't ask to become an activist, I began. I just wanted to drive home from work without being harassed. I wanted my son to be treated fairly when he went shopping. But sometimes life forces you to become more than you thought you could be. I talked about the importance of accountability, about the need for police and communities to work together, about the possibility of change when people are willing to stand up and speak out. I talked about the courage it takes to challenge injustice, even when doing so puts you at risk. After my speech, a young police officer approached me. He was about the same age as Terrence, with kind eyes and a nervous smile. "Mrs. Williams, I just wanted to say thank you. Your story helped me understand how my actions might affect people differently than I intended. I'm going to be better because of what you've shared." That conversation gave me hope. Not just for my children but for all the children who would grow up in a world where maybe, just maybe, they would be judged by their character rather than their skin color. Today, as I write this, Terrence is in his second year at Howard University. He's studying pre-med just as he planned, and he's thriving academically and socially. The false arrest shook him deeply, but it also gave him a clearer understanding of the world he's preparing to enter. He's learned to navigate life with both confidence and caution, understanding that his skin color will sometimes be seen as a threat, but refusing to let that define him or limit his dreams. He's become involved in student government and civil rights organizations on campus. He speaks to high school students about knowing their rights and standing up for justice. He's turned his painful experience into a source of strength and purpose. Marcus is a senior in high school now, and he's been accepted to several excellent colleges with full scholarships for computer science. He wants to use technology to solve social problems, to create apps and programs that can help bridge divides and promote understanding. He's already created an app that helps young people know their rights during police encounters, which has been downloaded thousands of times. Keisha graduated from Temple last year and is now teaching third grade in North Philadelphia. She's following in the footsteps of Mrs. Patterson, the teacher who inspired her, seeing potential in children that others might overlook. She's passionate about educational equity and works tirelessly to ensure that all her students have the support they need to succeed. As for me, I'm still a pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital. I still work long hours, still comfort scared children and worried parents, still find deep meaning in caring for others during their most vulnerable moments. But I'm also something else now. I'm a voice for change, a person who refuses to be silent when I see injustice. I serve on the Civilian Oversight Board that was created partly as a result of my advocacy. I speak at community events, sharing my story and encouraging others to stand up for their rights. I work with organizations that provide legal assistance to families facing discrimination and police misconduct. I've learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right even when you're afraid. It's speaking up even when your voice shakes. It's standing up for yourself and others even when it would be easier to look the other way. It's understanding that your individual experience is part of a larger pattern, and that change requires collective action. The night I was pulled over, I felt powerless. I felt like I was at the mercy of a system that didn't value my humanity. But I learned that I had more power than I realized. The power to speak up, to organize, to demand better. The power to change things, one conversation, one meeting, one voice at a time. There's still work to be done. There are still Officer Bradleys out there, still stores that profile customers based on race, still young men like my son who face discrimination and prejudice simply because of how they look. But there are also David Chens, people willing to stand up and do what's right even when it's difficult. There are police officers who want to serve their communities with honor and integrity. There are community leaders who refuse to give up, and ordinary citizens who find extraordinary courage when it matters most. I think about that scared woman sitting in her car 2 years ago, hands shaking as she watched Officer Bradley swagger back to his patrol car. I want to tell her that it's going to be okay, that she's stronger than she knows, that her voice matters, her story matters, her life matters, that the fear she feels is real and valid, but it doesn't have to define her. I want to tell her that they can try to make you feel small, but they can't change who you are. They can question your right to be in your own neighborhood, but they can't take away your dignity unless you let them. They can try to silence you, but they can't stop you from speaking truth if you're brave enough to use your voice. The road to justice is long and sometimes lonely. There are setbacks and disappointments, victories that feel too small and changes that come too slowly. But it's a road worth walking, and every step forward, no matter how small, makes it easier for the next person to follow. I've learned that individual acts of courage can create ripple effects that spread far beyond what we can imagine. My decision to speak up about my traffic stop led to changes in police policies that will affect thousands of people. My son's experience led to reforms at a store that will benefit countless future customers. Our willingness to fight back instead of accepting injustice created opportunities for others to do the same. I've also learned that healing from trauma requires action. 4 months after my encounter with Officer Bradley, I was consumed by fear and anxiety. But once I decided to fight back, to channel my anger into advocacy, I began to heal. Taking action gave me back my sense of agency and power. It transformed me from a victim into an agent of change. My children have learned these lessons too. They've seen that their mother is not helpless, that our family is not powerless, that ordinary people can make extraordinary differences when they're willing to stand up for what's right. They've learned that being black in America comes with challenges, but it also comes with strength, resilience, and the power to create change. They judged me by my skin color that night. They saw a black woman in a nice car and assumed the worst. They tried to humiliate me, to put me in what they thought was my place. But I showed them the strength of my spirit, the power of my voice, and the unbreakable determination of a mother who refuses to let injustice define her family's future. And in the end, that made all the difference. The fight continues, but I'm no longer afraid. I know who I am, I know what I'm worth, and I know that change is possible when people are willing to stand up and demand it. I know that my voice matters, that my story has power, and that speaking truth can light the way for others walking similar paths. My name is Monica Williams. I'm a nurse, a mother, and a fighter for justice. I'm a woman who refused to be silenced, who turned her pain into purpose, and who discovered that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they find the courage to stand up for what's right. And this is my story, a story of fear transformed into courage, of injustice met with determination, of one woman's refusal to accept a world where her children couldn't dream freely. It's a story that's still being written, not just by me but by everyone who decides that enough is enough, that change is possible, and that the arc of the moral universe really can bend toward justice when we're willing to help it along. The red and blue lights that once terrified me have become symbols of the work still to be done. But they no longer have the power to make me feel small. I am bigger than their assumptions, stronger than their prejudice, and more determined than their attempts to break my spirit. I am Monica Williams, and I am still here. Still fighting. Still believing. Still proving, every single day, that they were wrong about me and everything I represent. And that, more than anything else, is how we win.